Welcome, and thank you for joining us today for our July news briefing. I'm Phillip Sanfield, the Director of Media Relations for the Port of Los Angeles. It's a pleasure to be with all of you as we change our format just a bit to provide the latest news and perspective about the port. Joining me is Executive Director Gene Seroka. He'll give us an overview of the port's June data, along with his insights as we hit the halfway point of the year. Gene, you've been doing these virtual briefings for more than a year now. The feedback that I've received from media is that these are very valuable. So welcome and thank you for your time today.
Thanks, Phillip, and I really enjoy these every month and look forward to, more importantly, the comments and questions from our media guests today.
Great. So speaking of that, we've received some questions in advance, and Gene will get to those shortly. If you do have a question now or at any time during the briefing, just type it into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we will try to address those. And make sure to include your name and affiliation. All right, Gene, let's get right into it. Since the last time we met in this forum, the port surpassed 10 million TEUs in 12 months and broke the 1 million TEU barrier in May. Any opening thoughts here on these back-to-back milestones?
Yeah, Phillip, the first thing that comes to mind is gratitude, and specifically to the International Longshore and Warehouse Union workforce, our truckers, terminal operators, cargo owners, ocean carriers, railroads, and all our partners who are working so hard throughout this great surge. Together, we've kept the port operational during the pandemic. Dock work shifts have increased, and at-berth ship productivity has jumped 50% since pre-pandemic numbers. I'm so proud of the extraordinary work accomplished under these challenging circumstances. But second, there's still much more work to do. And while all these milestones are inspiring, the cargo continues to move at a record pace, and there's no lull in the action, no halftime intermission. We have to continue to squeeze every ounce of efficiency that we can out of this port complex. The bottom line, I'm extremely pleased with everything that we've accomplished, and now all of our supply chain partners, individually and collectively, needs to step up to further improve throughput and velocity. And to the cargo owners, we feel your pain. Containers need to move faster amid this surge. We're here working with you, and we will get this done together.
Gene, our June data is now available, and as expected, another good month. Can you take us through the top-line numbers and speak to how they stack up to the surge we've seen over the past year?
Sure. For the month of June, the Port of Los Angeles moved more than 876,000 TEUs. That's a 27% increase over 2020 numbers. Our busiest June in the port's 114-year history was just witnessed, and it outpaced the June record set just back in 2019 by a strong 12%. This was also the 11th consecutive month of year-on-year increases, following an equal number of declining months previously. Berth productivity, as I mentioned, remains 50% higher than it was last June, and that's been consistent throughout the surge. We're working on average 15 vessels every day, and please remember pre-pandemic, that was about 10 vessels that came into harbor each day. In the month of June, we welcomed 82 container vessels, including 7 extra loaders, also showing the strength of the marketplace, compared to 77 last year at this time. We're still averaging more than 900,000 TEUs each month and every month since last July. For context, before the pandemic, 900,000 TEUs was a strong peak season month by itself. This truly continues to be a remarkable run.
But taking a look at the imports, exports, and empties can really offer additional insight into what's happening on the docks. Can you break that down for us?
Sure. Imports came in north of 467,000 TEUs, so it continues to be clear that the U.S. consumer spending remains strong. And even with a return to the service sector spend, like travel, restaurants and ball games, retail sales, and e-commerce remain robust. Conversely, exports were really weak. Less than 100,000 TEUs for the month. And unfortunately, that's the lowest export number we've seen in Los Angeles since the year 2005. The ratio of imports to exports stands at about 5-to-1, the second consecutive month we've seen it this wide. And it's not a new story. Exports here have been down 28 of the last 32 months at the nation's busiest port. Empty containers are running 3 to 1 higher than exports. We finished the month with about 312,000 empty TEUs, which was a jump of 47% year on year. The strong demand for empties in Asia continues to create challenges throughout our supply chain. And some of our agricultural exporters and manufacturers continue to scramble for containers.
Gene, the port just closed its fiscal year, and we also reached the midway point of 2021. Where do we stand on both fronts?
Let's start with the fiscal year. The past 12 months have been like a peak season on auto repeat. The fiscal year 2021 closed with almost 10.9 million 20-foot equivalent units. That's a 12-month record for us by a wide margin. It tops a choppy year 2020 by 27% and beats out our top fiscal year on record, which was just set back in the years of 2018 and 19, by a substantial 12 percentage points. This past fiscal year showed us 8 of the top 12 months recorded in port history, and June ended our busiest quarter ever with 2.8 million TEUs. The previous high for a quarter was set just back at the fourth quarter of 2020 with 2.75 million Ts. Comparing 2021 to last year's midway mark with respect to the calendar year, the contrast is very stark. 2021 calendar year to date for us is at 5.4 million TEUs, which represents a 44% increase over 2020 numbers. But please keep in mind, the first half of 2020, cargo came to a crawl at the outset of the pandemic. The first half of 2021 sees the U.S. consumer purchasing surge, which has been in full gear. And that's the reason for the dramatic increase that we've witnessed so far, Phillip. The trade continues to be a one-way street, though. We're handling a lot of imports, not enough exports, and there are way too many empties going back. And this import surge has put a spotlight on the supply chain pressure points that continuously need our attention from the industry side.
Thanks, Gene. A reminder to the media, if any of these points that Gene's covering are triggering any questions, please ask them in the chat box below. So, Gene, these are off-the-chart numbers you're mentioning here. How do you see the second half of the year playing out?
The cargo outlook remains solid for the back half of 2021. Our friends at the National Retail Federation have just revised their retail sales forecast, which is now up significantly to a range of 10.5 to 13.5 year-on-year growth. We're now seeing seasonal items such as back to school, fall fashion, and Halloween items start to make their way in. And we do expect some cargo owners to bring in year-end holiday products a little bit earlier than normal this year. All signs point to a busy second half of our 2021 calendar year. Our signal data on the screen shows heavy imports for the remainder of July. This month will likely land between 950,000 and 1 million TEUs, depending on the anchorage situation as we hit July 31st. August forecast is similar, well into the 900,000 TEU range. For long-range estimates, today, I'm pleased to announce a new port optimizer and control tower tool that estimates cargo volume now 6 months out. Called the Port of Los Angeles Horizon, it uses an algorithm based on historical and trending volumes here in Los Angeles. This tool is the first of its kind. The Port of Los Angeles Horizon measures loaded imports, exports, and empty containers. Today, based on the Port of Los Angeles Horizon data, we're estimating the Port of LA will finish 2021 in the range of 10.5 million TEUs for the calendar year. There are obviously a lot of variables at play, but it's our first look at a learning-based forecast, and we're proud to break ground with this new data module. The Port of LA Horizon can be accessed from the port's control tower at tower.portoptimizer.com. It's yet another service from the Port of Los Angeles for our stakeholders to better plan and allocate resources during this incredibly historic surge in cargo.
Gene, you referenced anchorage time. Can you talk a little bit about the trends with respect to anchorage of the ships out in the San Pedro Bay and corresponding dwell times?
Yes, Phillip, it really is a mixed bag with respect to anchorage and dwell times. Some data trending positively, while significant challenges remain in our supply chain. In the month of June, about half of our container vessels went straight to anchor. That's down significantly from the peak of 90% of ships going to the parking lot back in the month of February. It's also the lowest percentage and number since last October when ships first started heading to anchor. Average wait time at anchor was only 5 days in June compared to a peak of 8 days back in March. But the dwell time on container terminals continues to hover near its peak of 5 days. On-dock rail time is running at about 12 days, not far from its peak back in the spring as well. This is a source of significant concern across the supply chain. And with warehouses filled to the rafters, street dwell times ran as high as 8 days in the month of June. The bottom line on all this, the continued surge has strained all nodes of the U.S. supply chain, and we must change these trends.
Gene, several reporters have asked about the effect of the COVID outbreak at the port of Yantian in South China. Has that had an impact here on the dwell times or anchorage situation?
Yes, it has. The COVID outbreak in May at the Yantian port in South China has had somewhat of a ripple effect here in Los Angeles. As I reported last time, about 1/3 of all of our vessel services that call here in LA originate from this region. Vessels arriving here slowed somewhat in June as Guangdong province operated at about 50% of normal ship departure capacity. The South China seaports resumed full operations late in the month of June, which means more ships started to head our way during this month, in July, and into August. As a result, we're seeing a few more ships at anchor now, likely tied to that additional number of vessels that started coming once the folks got healthy back on the ground in Yantian, Chihuahua, Shekau, and other ports in Guangdong province. We'll continue to closely monitor, keep up with our friends overseas, and keep chipping away to bring those anchorage numbers down.
Thank you, Gene. Let's go to some of the questions that have come in. Max Schwerdfeger from Port Technology International asks this: what is your reaction to President Biden's executive order cracking down on competitive pricing and potential breaches of contracts regarding U.S. exports?
Thanks for the question, Matt. And for 7 years, since the first day I came into this job, I've been talking about competitiveness of our ports, and specifically here in Los Angeles. With respect to the president's executive order, the Federal Maritime Commission absolutely should investigate and enforce any unfair practice allegations. The executive order is an acknowledgement that addressing the challenges of all supply chain issues impacting U.S. ports is a national priority. The issues facing our supply chain are complex and could benefit greatly from sustained leadership in this area. President Biden is taking a solutions-oriented approach to restoring reliability and predictability for American consumers and businesses alike.
Matt Leonard follows up on the same theme here from Supply Chain Dive. He says he'd be interested to know if you've seen any indications that the FMC is increasing enforcement of its detention and demurrage rules.
Well, thanks for joining again, Matt. Good to hear from you. And like always, with fact-finding number 29 led by Commissioner Dye, the work of Chairman Maffei, the FMC is actively pursuing solutions to improve our supply chain and throughput at ports, while being mindful of our workers, the health and safety on the docks, and all involved to make American supply chain competitive. So yes, they're active. We speak on a regular basis and continue to act in front and behind the scenes to give them as much information as possible so they can make good decisions. And I've been so encouraged by their outreach to the various stakeholders across the board in the supply chain community. Tomorrow, Chairman Maffei will co-chair a discussion with U.S. Department of Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg to talk about how we can improve our work here at the ports in Southern California by bringing in a wide array of participants in the supply chain to offer up ideas on what we're doing here in the short term and what long-term changes needed to be made to ensure the competitiveness of our ports going down line. Thanks, Matt.
Eric Watkins from Lloyd's List asks this. You said recently that there needs to be a better match between ship sizes and berths at the port. As ship sizes continue to increase, will the port be looking to increase the dimensions of berths to match the growth in ship sizes? Or do you think we're nearing the point where ship size will remain steady in the port in the 12 to 16K TEU range?
Great question, Eric, who lives right here in San Pedro and sees the activities every day. As you know, Eric, we have been ready for a long time, and it was the foresight of people like Los Angeles Mayor Tom Bradley and long-serving General Manager Easy Burtz who had a vision of making sure that we could handle the biggest ships possible, that we had the widest turning basins and fortified wharfs necessary. But did they ever believe they'd see what we're witnessing today? Maybe not, but that vision really continues to emanate from the current Harbor Department staff. As you well know, we have welcomed the largest ships patrolling the waters globally today, with 3 consecutive calls from MSC's 23,000 class vessels. So we're ready right now, Eric, as it pertains to how we manage the biggest ships in the trade. I do believe, to your good comment, that the workhorse vessel in the Trans-Pacific will probably land us between the 14,000 and 16,000 TEU class vessels. We can work them quickly enough to maintain that fixed weekly service departures, both here off the West Coast and, importantly, back in Asia for imports returning to the United States. My comment to you in a discussion several weeks back was that we need to make sure we're putting our biggest ships in our deepest water with fortified wharfs, and the smaller ships that are coming in, whether they be expedited services, Jones Act vessels, or other varieties, need to be worked at facilities that can be most efficient for them as well. So it really is like threading a needle from a mile away, but making sure we have a plan to utilize the great infrastructure that we have with bricks and mortar compared to the ships coming in is the task we focus on every day. Appreciate you joining as always, Eric.
The next question is from Dan Ronan at Transport Topics. Many ports, including the Port of LA, are investing big money in infrastructure to handle large ships. I'd like to get your thoughts on the need for additional federal infrastructure money as part of the Biden plan working through Congress.
Thanks for joining, Dan, and good to hear from you again. You and I have talked about this before. Over the last 10 years, the United States Congress has outinvested in the East and Gulf Coast compared to the West Coast by a matter of 10 to 1. More than $10 billion has been invested in those other ports compared to a little more than $1 billion on the West Coast over this past decade. That needs to change. And we're working diligently with the elected officials, policymakers, and the Biden administration to bring a very clear vision on why that's important. And we see it right now. We believe that investment in the Port of Los Angeles is for the greater good of the American economy because of one simple fact, among many, that the cargo that traverses our port reaches each and every one of our nation's 435 congressional districts. The decisions we make here affect someone always, and that's the message we'll continue to carry to Washington, Sacramento, and other leaders across the country. Thanks, Dan.
Next question is from Chris Lewis. I am not sure of Chris's affiliation, but he does ask, does Los Angeles and the U.S. need to start building more container port capacity, or can this surge be managed?
Great question, Chris, and thanks for joining, I believe, for the first time. Container ship capacity, port capacity, rail, truck are all topics of conversation around the clock with us as we've witnessed and been a part of this surge for the last 16 months. I will tell you, here at the Port of Los Angeles, we build infrastructure projects for decades-long decisions. And we also look at what that volume unconstrained could be. Our most recent analysis showed that by the year 2040, the twin ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles could manage some 40 million 20-foot equivalent units per year. Right now, we're at between 18 and 19 million. There is latent capacity outside the surge that we've been witnessing. On a traditional weekly basis, our shoreside cranes are only working about 50 to 55% of the time. Looking at what we do today, operating 9 work shifts per week, there could be opportunities to squeeze even more efficiency out of the 7-day calendar. In addition, right now, on our night-side gate activity between the hours of 6 p.m. and 3 a.m., we're still seeing a shortfall of 30% of our truck reservations, meaning 30% of those reservations are going unused, yet many of our importers and exporters are coming to us regularly saying they can't get their containers in or out of the port. And we have to work during this triage situation to really squeeze them in. So we've got to take care first of the efficiencies that we have available to us, looking at every supply chain optimization tool and our digitization strategy. It's my contention that rail projects that were designed and our digitization following, had those been really implemented, we would not see the levels of congestion we had. So we've got to really take stock of everything we have on the bricks and mortar side, digital infrastructure, the great institutional knowledge that we have here in Southern California in our brokerage and forwarder community, our skilled labor, and so many other logisticians that have value to add to improving the throughput here at the Port of Los Angeles. Chris, thank you very much for the question.
Thanks. And Chris just informed me he is with the Freight Business Journal. Next question's from Bill Mongaluzzo, Journal of Commerce. Bill writes, terminal operators say excessive rail container dwell times at their facilities and at the off-dock rail yards has been the main cause of terminal congestion for the past 2 months, and the situation's not improving. What can be done in cooperation with the terminals and railroads to remedy the problem and return the terminals to fluidity with peak season approaching?
Thanks, Bill, for joining once again today. And as I've said before in this and other venues, there is no one lever we can pull. There is no one causal that is to blame for the ills of the supply chain on a global basis, much less right here in Los Angeles. I've highlighted and continued to work with leadership from both of our Western railroads at the Union Pacific and Burlington Northern Santa Fe. Believe me, those folks at the highest levels are working around the clock to solve the rail issues. But as we've seen, the successive vessel calls, the one-way trade due in part to poor trade policy, in part to this once-in-a-100-year surge of consumer buying that we've witnessed, put a tremendous strain on asset providers of all types, not only the Western railroads. These folks are hustling back the engine power, the crews, and the equipment as fast as they can, knowing that there's a paucity of exports right now based on the market definitioning that's taking place. We also know that once a vessel completes its work here, and remember that vessel productivity remains 50% above pre-pandemic levels, that vessel heading back to Asia is then met with another vessel coming in that's anchored 3 miles away. There's no time to groom the yards, to prepare our equipment, do preventative maintenance, all the things that we're accustomed to doing, giving a normal schedule and pattern of ship arrivals and departures. So it's not a singular issue that represents what the supply chain looks like today. It is the fact that we have asked and in many cases implored our importers to pick up their cargo. As you note, I reported our dwell times crept up again in June. We've got to reverse that trend. Putting extra emphasis on velocity of cargo, moving it out as quickly as we can, and de-vanning to bring those containers and chassis back is also of great importance. Alleviating the pressure on the more than 2 billion square foot of warehousing from the shores of the Pacific out to the Mojave Desert is high on our list as well. We've got to get that cargo out through the fulfillment, DCs, warehouses, and cross docks to get to the RDCs, store levels, and to our homes and offices where we're picking up our goods that we're buying online. It has also been stated that online buying has doubled in the last year as a percentage of total retail sales in the United States, off a number that it took 10 years to earn. 10 years worth of retail sales bought online was doubled in 12 months. So all of this is putting extreme pressure. And while it's rightly noted that we've got to continue to work on our rail product, there are other issues that have to continue to be honed as well. But thanks for joining, Bill, and appreciate the good questions.
We have a few more left here, and thanks for those who've been asking. And one last call here. If you do have a question, please go ahead and type it in at the chat box at the bottom of your screen. Next question is from Stas Margaronis, the American Journal of Transportation. Stas says that a recent trade report indicates that U.S. West Coast ports saw an import market share jump to about 39% of all containerized imports through American mainland ports in April, compared to about 37% in April of 2019. Do you think this trend is likely to continue?
I do, because of all the predictive analytics that we've been sharing at today's session, as well as what we normally bring to the journalist community during our monthly pressers. All indications are July and August look super strong. We'll be heading into the traditional peak season, and our outlook now using the horizon shows a very strong second half of the year. The numbers are going to fall where they may. Market share is important because it means more cargo is coming in. The more cargo that comes in means the greater level of jobs creation that we can induce here at the nation's largest port. So all of that is important, but it comes down to competitiveness. We've got to deliver value for the money that's spent. Our operations have to be succinct. We've got to align our policies with what we want to do for economic development and jobs creation along the lines of where we want to be with the world-leading environmental strategies that we have in place today. So all of this is important, but the numbers look strong, Stas, and I really appreciate you joining just about every one of these press conferences that we've held so far from up north in Oakland. Thank you.
Thank you, Gene. Next question is from Jeff Berman of Logistics Management. Gene, in the past, you've talked about the pressing need for a national export strategy, given how exports have suffered due to continued and ongoing trade tensions with China and the strength of the U.S. dollar. Do you think there's a path for exports to find some positive momentum? And if so, how does it happen?
I do, and it's because my overtures have been really well received with the new administration under President Biden, specifically working with the Secretary of Commerce and others in the cabinet level to say we've got to find a way to jumpstart our export community again, get them reconnected with their customers overseas. Exports have been lagging, whether it be through good economic times, the pandemic, and now as we're forging our recovery post-COVID-19. And how this looks, it's not going to be legislated and it's not going to be regulated. It's about inducements. It's about getting people excited about being in the export community again. Even the Phase 1 trade deal with China has created non-compensatory pricing for the American farmer. That's got to be corrected. And part of the discussion we'll have tomorrow with Secretary Buttigieg and Chairman Maffei is going to be around that. The trade policies, not to succumb to people who don't have the same ideals that we do with respect to rules-based trade, but how can we get that American exporter, the folks back on the job? Remember, there's still 6.5 million folks not working today that were before the pandemic started. We've got to inject them back into our economic stream, onto the job market, and helping us, especially in the areas of agriculture, manufacturing broadly, and our automotive sector, all of which are looking for good workers. So it could be areas like training and development, hiring, land use, the ability to bring cargo with ease, talking about all these containers that have been expeditiously repositioned back to Asia to catch the next round of imports. Maybe there's a way that subsidies could help make that transportation network more attractive. Again, the big solve for, Jeff, as you and I have talked about before, is that most of our imports go to major metropolitan areas. Many of our exports emanate from rural America. So how do we get that triangle connected with assets, truck power, containers, and the wherewithal to do this in a timely fashion so the lag doesn't impact the service providers? That's part of what we'll be working on with the Secretary of Commerce and many others. So I'm really hopeful, but we've got to roll up our sleeves and come together as a community on this all-important effort.
Chris Lewis from the Freight Business Journal has a follow-up question. Do you see any opportunities for the Port of Los Angeles from the enlarged Panama Canal?
Yeah, this has been a discussion for some time, Chris. And with the widening of the Panama Canal, the addition of the third lock, it allows larger vessels to go through, which have better economics from a slot cost perspective than their predecessor vessels. We've been long known to have a strong foothold in the west coast of South America, especially for perishable goods. I like our chances now on the East Coast because the economics will look a little more different. The cost structure, the price components of bringing cargo back and around to California. I also like an opportunity to open up new markets for our California agricultural and manufacturing centers right here in the Golden State to be able to trade with emerging markets on the East Coast as well. We also see that in the industry, we've got some pendulum services and additional markets that have been opened up moving through the Panama Canal, both east and west, on those longer haul trades. So yeah, there are opportunities for us as well, given the investment that the great country of Panama has made.
Thank you, Gene. We're at our last question here. We've had several travel industry reporters over the last week or so ask about the status of cruising at the Port of Los Angeles. What is the latest on when cruising may resume at the World Cruise Center?
Yeah, thanks, Phillip. And I do have very good news to report today. The first World Cruise Center departure here at the Port of Los Angeles is scheduled now for September 25th. The Grand Princess will be on a 7-day cruise to the Mexican Riviera. We're currently working on an agreement specifically with Princess and other cruise lines to make sure that CDC guidelines are followed, and this is an excellent start. The top priority is making sure that our passengers, crew, and all our shoreside workers are kept safe and healthy. Princess plans for a 95% vaccination rate of crews and passengers, and that too is the start that we're looking for. This is a great piece of news for LA tourism, for our residents and visitors who want to get back out on the water. Each time a cruise ship calls here at the Port of Los Angeles, it brings in about $1 million to the local economy. So this is all part of our recovery and post-COVID economic activity that we're so looking forward to working with our partners on. And with that, Phillip, I want to thank you for hosting today and for the media to join us once again here for the update in July. I look forward to our next engagement coming up in August. Thank you, everyone, and stay safe.
Thank you, Gene. And this concludes our conference, and we will keep you posted on future media briefings. Thank you again for joining us. Have a good day.